Welcome, folks, to Ask Strong Towns Anything. Today with Chuck Marohn, president and founder of Strong Towns, and someone that deeply understands what it is for you as members, as participants in your community, to face serious struggles. Going and visiting community after community after community gave insight to Chuck, I think, that you'll touch on, that these were issues that were not just unique to Brainerd, not just unique to central Minnesota. When that first request for speaking outside of your state came in, you said, wait, people outside of the state are even dealing with this. And then the realization, actually, this is something that we see in places like Uganda, for example, where we have a local conversation pushing back on the way that street design standards have been used to terrorize people within their community. We see it in places like Dunedin, New Zealand, where we have now a new local conversation. Daniel is representing in Dunedin. We've got,
Seriously? Very
yeah,
nice.
Daniel Basubas is here. So, or he's waving. Yeah, there we go.
Oh,
And we've
incredible.
got folks all over. Good. Also, I'm going to do a quick shout out to James Walker, who is with Marion, Ohio, and a key proponent of their successful bid to be the strongest town contest winner last year. And so, welcome, Chuck. And I will, if I can, I'm just going to throw it over right into the opening question, which is: I live in Montour Falls, writes Katie, as a small rural village that feels deeply divided. There's the haves and the have-nots on either side on two different streets. The village board has prioritized tourism over year-round jobs, even removing playground equipment because it must have been a problem as kids were hanging out there. They simultaneously ignore rising drug issues in her neighborhood. She said, I attend the meetings, I hear the mayor praise our village, but the reality on the ground tells a different story. So there's sort of two faces to the community in this way. Her question is, how do I start bringing Strong Towns ideas to my Henry Street neighborhood where opportunity feels scarce? Kids have lost their gathering places or had them taken away. Officials seem blind to everyday struggles in ways that build community pride, foster small scale change, and help residents take ownership of local improvements. Love the question. Wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Wow. Well, why don't I just start harder, Norm, than this one? This is a city of about 1,500 people. I'm looking. It's just south of Cornell, I think. So this is a gorgeous part of New York. Um, I think the question how to get started is often the hardest one that we face. And I'm going to say this, and then it's going to sound like a cop out, Norm. I feel like I'm the least qualified person to do like this. Would if you said who should answer this question on our team, I would say you should answer this question, not me. I'm the person who I'll tell you this today. I had a Facebook chat with, I'm going to say, my local rival today, and it was very nice. We were nice to each other. He was kind of ticked off at me. Um, it's the president of our local chamber of commerce, and I wrote in a finale on the Button Hook interchange here in Baxter. I wrote that him and I have been on the opposite side of every major public investment that's been made since he arrived in town, which was maybe like 10 or 15 years ago. And he got mad at me, and we've been talking and had a very nice conversation. I'm not the right person to answer this question. Norm, I would say, like, what do you think? How would you get started? I feel like you have to start with the people you know and where you are. And there were a couple red flags in that question to me, kind of what I would say are just extreme language things like, everybody and all the time and never. And those things are really not helpful to starting a dialogue. But where would you start? I actually feel like this is a better question for you.
Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence. And I think that several things stand out to me. One is that there's often a misperception of where the real value in a community lies. And so we've seen that in places where they say, "Oh, the downtown has a drug problem or homelessness problem." It is the place that nobody wants to go to. And yet, when you do the value per acre analysis and you even compare how much property tax is being generated in those areas, you begin to realize, in Medicine Hat, I said, your downtown is your money pot, and all of the things around that you've built out, where what seems like success is sort of lurking, that's actually your money pit. That's the thing that is going to hang you upside down. I guess that's very extreme language upset as well. But layering in then, there has to be an article that I'll share in the chat in a moment is, what to do when your city won't listen to reason. I hear in Katie's question some of that grappling, like, I feel like I'm not getting an audience. We recommend several core things. One, start even more local. So if you're not having an audience at the city level, say, what can I do at the block level? Or even if you're having no success at the block level, start with just your core neighbors. Is there anything that you can do to say, well, if there's no playground equipment, what are the types of play that we can provide in our street or in a nearby park? Taking small steps to take ownership of those spaces can be really important. And I will plug tomorrow, we're doing a session with Vanessa Elias, a locomotive session that's free for all Strong Towns members on how to host block parties and basically how to use block parties as stimulants or catalysts for a greater sense of local pride, a greater sense of local opportunity. And so Katie, you've identified several core things that your community lacks that I think you could actually, with neighbors, step up and say, well, we can do low cost versions of that and help us. The other important thing, I'm going to paraphrase what you said a while ago, Chuck, which is if a single person comes to the city hall with a concept, they're just a person with an idea. And there are a lot of like well-meaning people that are just people with an idea. But if they come with a group, all of a sudden now they're part of a movement for change. And this is where the Strong Towns local conversation in your community would be one of those things. You would not be the smallest community to have a startup local conversation group that is just saying, we're a bunch of people that care about our community. We're going to meet together, talk about these things from a Strong Towns perspective, and put them into action where we live. And I think that might be one of those steps to begin to peel back some of the layers around tourism boosting, for example. We would say, do not ever become a tourism dependent community. It is fine for tourism to sort of give some ebb and flow to your community, but it can be much like a resource economy, really cyclical and create the wrong priorities in your place. And then the other element of it is it's got to happen through simple things like neighborhood walks, identifying like what is it that we can fix just with the very scarce resources that we have. Almost certainly, as you begin to coalesce a movement of people that care about your neighborhood in a more defined way, saying we're not asking for everything, we're asking for the next smallest thing to be done in our place, you may begin to see momentum build. I would say work as vociferously and as joyously with every elected sort of incumbent in your community, even if you're preparing to endorse their opponent in the next election. Develop those good relationships, and some of that is to really drive or to be careful with language, for example, around they don't care. Almost every public official that I've met, except for the very corrupt ones, do care and take very seriously that not only their public image, but also their internal sense of why they do what they do is because they care. And so when you assert you don't care or you've given up on our children, they would say, no, I've had to make difficult decisions in the face of many trade-offs where budget is limited or we really are grappling with shortages or there just isn't money there or the loud squeaky wheel is our local businesses that demand these things. And so, what could I do? You say in caring, you can now begin to look for those small things that you can do in our community, in our neighborhood, and to guard against some of the language of haves and have-nots is also, I think, unproductive in our context. We just find you're all members of a single community, and really reinforcing that can really help. Yeah,
So
Chuck, jump in.
there's 4 homes for sale in my neighborhood, Norm.
Yeah.
I'm going to help you pick out one and then get your visa and whatever you need to move to my city because we could use you.
Well, and I am drooling over. I mean, we can buy a lot for $1 million to scrape it and put up a brand new building on it. And you've got homes that are beautiful for 189,000.
Yeah,
I
man.
do, yeah. So all that to say, I do want to encourage the question. I think it's wonderful to be asking these things. Katie's a Strong Towns member. She says, I really care about my place and want to continue to build what we're doing there. So thank you, Katie. This is just the beginning, but definitely do explore getting a local conversation started. I always say local conversations start on your timeline, but with Strong Town support and member support. The establishment now of 305 local conversations and counting. And there's no community that's too small to have a group of people meeting together to talk about Strong Towns ideas and put them in action where they live. But let's go into our next question. This is right up your alley. Wow, talking about switching gears. How does a one lot TIF, tax increment finance scheme, or I shouldn't call it a scheme, that sounds nefarious, a tax increment finance setup, work to encourage local resident affordable home ownership? This is something that Muskegon, we've written about Muskegon. Maybe we can drop in an article link for that. But do you want to share first, Chuck, probably set the stage and then explain how does that help with affordable home ownership?
Well, in Muskegon, the thing that they've done is they've used TIF essentially to make your down payment. So, imagine cutting 20% off the top of the house price, letting you get in with no down payment. I mean, that's a huge, there are very few affordable housing programs where the city is not going to lose money where they could do that. So let's walk through the steps of a tax increment finance project. Right now, you have bare ground. This is what they're doing in Michigan, in Muskegon. They're saying these are lots that have been sitting empty for 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, or more. They've got sewer, water, sidewalk. They're just empty lots in the core of our city. You have taxes that you're paying on raw land right now. You go out and build a house, and they've limited it to, I think, 900 square feet or less. These are not meant to be massive homes. These are starter homes, right? You build that, and then after you build it, your taxes will go up to here. That difference is called the tax increment. And what the city does there's some ways they call it, but essentially what the city does is the city borrows money, makes your down payment, and then uses that increment to pay back that debt. And so it could happen in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it takes to pay down that debt. The city writes into that agreement clawback provisions. So if after 1 year, flip the house and you still owe a bunch of money, you pay back the city in whole. You don't get to keep that money, but you vest over time as you pay it down. And then once it's paid off, you continue to pay your taxes. But instead of the taxes going to cover that debt that the city took on, the taxes now go to the general city fund and the school district and the county and everybody else who gets the taxes. It's a way to dramatically lower the upfront price for someone of an affordable unit in a key neighborhood. I think it's really important to point out, I don't think this is a good approach. I would never use it for the cul-de-sac out on the edge, for the 5-story apartment. This is what Muskegon has done is they've crafted for entry level units. They've crafted a mechanism to fund them that is really cost effective and is going to bend the curve on those level of units.
Maybe one quick thing is, do you want to also touch on the contrast between this version of TIF and what TIFs are normally used for in terms of the 5/1s, or sort of the, hey, we'll
Yeah,
do big
well,
things and we just knock down the responsibility for each developer with a tax increment finance?
so what we often see with tax increment financing is that someone will come to City Hall and say, "Do you want this shiny object? Yes or no? If you do, give us a big tax subsidy to do it." And when you start looking at tax subsidies, there's a toolbox. One of the toolbox that's most often used is tax increment financing. So, yeah, I was just in Kansas City last week. There's a bunch of commercial development in their downtown where they've used TIF to finance that. And a lot of people point to it and say this has been very successful. When we've done the analysis on that, I say we, Urban 3 has done the analysis and we've written about it. Kansas City has given up a lot of tax revenue in order to make these happen, and has not seen the end result be more productive than what would have otherwise been there. We profiled a Costco, for example, where tax increment financing was used to essentially tear down a bunch of the neighborhood and then make the lot Costco ready. And then they built the Costco. Tax increment financing was used to pay for all that cost. At the end of the day, what they have left is actually less tax base than what they started with. That's also the Taco John's example. I've written about Taco John's here in Brainerd. One of the things that Taco John's did is they came to the city and said, we've got a whole block of stuff here. We would like it removed. You've labeled it blight. We want it removed. And if you remove that, we will build this Taco John's. In order to pay for that removal, they have a 27-year tax increment financing subsidy that they did. And the thing is, this is going to get a little nuanced, but if everybody's seen the Taco John's, the old and blighted block is worth this much, and the Taco John's is worth this much. What the city did, and I'm going to say this is like one of the dumbest things you could ever do, is the city spent money. They went and borrowed money and then spent it to reduce the land value, or reduce the value to this, because they tore down all the buildings. And then they based the TIF on this. So you got a tax increment of this much. They basically devalued the property in order to capture tax increment. So not only do they get less tax dollars when it is done, just like net, but they tie up the tax dollars that they do get for 27 years. This is the kind of stuff that the way these happen is by people who don't do math. They basically do project development. And what happens is that when the commercial thing that you want comes in the door, you will say, all right, we really want this growth. We really want these jobs. We really want this investment. What do we do to make it happen? And then the elected officials turn to the staff, or the staff comes to elected officials, one way or the other, and says, here's how we make it happen. Tax abatement, tax subsidy, waiver of fees, waiver of this, bam, bam, bam. There's a whole toolkit, and it gets presented. And then you have this debate that is not about the numbers. The Muskegon one, I really, really like. That's probably the only tax increment financing project I've ever liked that I've seen. Now, Edwards worked on some that I think he would argue were better, but yeah.
Yeah. Just the idea of using a tool that's normally used for evil to use it for good feels good, but definitely is one of those things that we're challenged by. There are very few superstars within the Strong Towns orbit. We're all pretty regular folks, but Elisa Lee, you are definitely a superstar. I would love to hear your question for Chuck, and give you the stage. Go ahead, Elisa.
Elisa Lee doesn't know that I've been talking about her continuously for the last week amongst everybody here. So
that's such an honor. My question is about street design. So we've talked a lot about within housing how we see that there are wasteful costs, wasteful policies that make adding housing more expensive than it needs to be. I'm wondering if we've looked at like wasteful costs within redoing streets, because we've been getting numbers around it's going to cost $40,000 to do three big mural art intersections and painted curb extensions, and the city is spending about $200,000 to do 2 creative crosswalks, which they got a grant for, and they're paying artists to do. So there's a few costs there, but I haven't really seen a lot about like, have we looked? Are there comps for some of these things, and is there an analysis about where some of these costs are wasteful, if any, and where could we get started in that? Because I feel like we know about it in the housing side, but on the street design side, I'm less clear.
So are you talking more about like small maintenance things or tactical interventions? Or are you talking about street design in general?
More the small tactical things, but that are done by the city. So I know that it would cost very little if the community was allowed to go out and do it. And
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of the city repainting crosswalks or doing kind of citywide service days, it just seems like $40,000 to coordinate one service day for 3 traffic calming art intersections. I mean, we've kind of just accepted that that's how much it costs, but do we have to accept that? Is there an understanding
Yeah.
there?
No, it's totally so I think about Barka Patel in Jersey City and her going out into the back storage shed and getting paint for the tennis courts and then going out and painting streets with it. And basically not asking for permission, just like, I'm on the staff. My job is street safety. I'm going to go do this. You were talking about someone with no budget who basically scrounged up loose parts to go make this happen. I think Ed, if I could have you, I feel like you've done enough of these projects. I have some sense of like where costs get added unnecessarily, but maybe you could walk through that side of the city part because you've been an assistant city administrator and done with this. Aren't there a lot of things from just a? I mean, you've got to contract bid things. You've got to, there's just a bunch of things that add costs, right?
Oh yeah, and the first cost is all the consultants and all.
Yeah.
So here's the last city I worked in. We did not have money, but we had a really talented public works department. And if there was something broken, they would go out and scrounge up all the parts, the duct tape, the bubble gum, and they would make it as good as they could with what we had. There's a story that an article or some social stuff we did on a dangerous street in Ranson, West Virginia, that was too wide and everybody drove really fast on. If I was to hire a consultant to tell me what to do on that road, that would have been $15,000-$20,000 to get their professional expertise. It would have been another 10 or 15,000 for them to do a maintenance plan, to shut down the road, and then we'd have to hire a crew, and they would want to be at certain wages and all of this stuff. Our city bought a paint striper that goes on the back of a pickup truck, and they bought 5 gallons of paint. There are different grades of paint. Our all-in cost for that project to do these 2 city blocks was less than $200 in material, and we didn't use all the paint, so it went to the next project. The equipment we used, we actually rented it out to other cities. It repaid for itself. And my public works department, everybody was there for the first one because they wanted to learn that skill. Then I had a whole department that they could go out anywhere in the week, and as they would see a broken sign or a burnout light, if they saw a street area that needed to be restriped, they had the equipment and we could eyeball it and do it. So we were able to make a street safer. It was like 4 white lines on the street with the equipment we had for less than $200. This is the type of stuff when we allow Public Works to do their piece. When you talked about the crosswalk, shutting that down to do $40,000 to shut down a street to go and paint it, what do you charge for a festival? I know that the folks in our Portland, the PDX Strong Towns, they use festival permits and do this type of work. And the festival permit is like, I don't know, $100. City staff helps them fill it out. And then they bring all the materials, they scrounge up all the materials and do the work. So
It's like a
what I
loophole.
yeah, and everybody appreciates it because they all are moving forward as an improvement. These things are contributing, they're addressing issues in the city, they're bringing joy, they're engaging residents. It's really easy Monday morning to walk into City Hall and celebrate a crosswalk where an entire community helped put that in, then coming in Monday morning where a consultant went out or contractor out on Thursday and put one in and nobody knew what it was about. And
So can I add one other thing? I think that often the thing that drives up costs at City Hall, if you go and ask them and they'll give you like they're generally like liability related too. There's a whole kind of overlay of we're scared of getting sued. And so we can't just send out a guy with a can of paint. We can't just authorize people to do whatever because, if something bad goes wrong, then we're liable. This is a misunderstanding of liability. But if we take it seriously, what we recognize is that there's a lot that we can do with memos to the file that actually address 99% of the liability issue. And when I say memo to the file, I'm literally cities become liable when they do things thoughtlessly, or when they are, what the legal term would be like grossly negligent, like we are aware of an issue and we're completely ignoring it. If you do things with intention, if you say, we see this here and we're doing this here for this reason, and it is our belief that this will make things safer and will address safety, and here's why we believe that. And like, it can literally be like a standard letter that we put together, and you write that and you put that in the file and you date stamp it. You've got like the rock solid defense for if anyone ever comes and says this is a problem. You're Even if you do the wrong thing and it does create like a disaster, cities have a really high threshold for being sued and being found liable if they believe and express a belief that they're acting in the public interest. So if the thing that is causing all the, we need this consultant to sign off on this, and we need this department to do this, and we need that to happen, and this, and we can't just give you a bucket of paint and da 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 da, we can say, hey, we know this intersection has been dangerous. We know that this technique has improved safety in other places. We know we have a limited budget and have to make decisions on where to allocate limited resources. We are going to do this as a way to improve safety. And we will look over time at the track record there and adjust if data suggests otherwise. But this is how we're going to proceed. Now you have eliminated your liability because you've met your due diligence. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not the person that can say that with authority, but I have seen other places that do that and have been very successful doing that. And
It,
that will reduce 90% of your costs.
the friction is not the externals, it's the internals.
Yes.
The public works director did something that the city engineer didn't know was occurring. What I found,
Yeah.
what I found is that when we identified a problem in the community, dangerous intersection, a missing crosswalk, we would throw our city engineer in the public works director's truck. We drive out there, we look at it for 5 minutes. It wasn't complicated of what needed to be done. It then became a work order for maintenance, and that built the trust in the city for every time that that condition repeated, public works could just go do. So we would do this with stop signs. If a stop sign would fall down, we wouldn't call the city engineer to fix it. Public works grabbed the one out of the truck and put it up. So we could find these things, and we always gave public works the cheapest paint. We used basically house paint to paint things on the street first. And that would go through the spray gun really easily. Yes, it would only last a few months on the street, but if we made a mistake, we could power wash it off. If it worked well, then we would do the investment of the next quality of paint that would last for years. Or if we got lucky, if we striped it on a state road, or adjacent to a state road, when the state road crew would come in, they would come in with the expensive paint and make it permanent. Um, but it shouldn't, these should be just standard practices that when we work together internally in our departments, when we go out there and we are all on that same goal where safety is an institutional priority, when departments want to work together, when we want to save tax dollars. And Medicine Hat, they created the Nimble Award for staff that would do this. That's how their city manager reinforced this behavior. And you just, time and time again, you could do that. We could do a lot of stuff in our community with $40,000. Imagine what you could do with 200,000. We could make a lot of streets safer and more lovable.
Yeah, Elisa, there's certainly that culture of whether or not there's any willingness to sort of yield control, yield, even the sense of like everything being done to a finished state. I've joked that engineers don't fear public speaking or death as their two biggest things they fear. It's having to return to a problem that they fixed. And so the whole idea of an incremental adaptive sort of response to something feels very distant. Chuck, you wrote years ago about Memphis and Broad Avenue in particular, where Memphis was realizing we have so little in our coffers, we actually have to almost stand back and let other things begin to happen. And that was actually beginning to cause them to see like citizen initiative really beginning to lead the way. The last bit, Lisa, if you haven't already taken this approach, is branding everything as a pilot is really valuable because pilots are the one thing that get around like hoops and barrels, and that can definitely take us in that direction as well. So, yeah, love that. Great question. Let's go over to Daniel in and literally by go over, we're going to go over several thousand miles of ocean to Otago Regional Council. Daniel is a local conversation leader there and as well a regional staff member. Daniel, welcome to Ask Strong Towns Anything, and love to hear your thoughts or your question today.
Hi, thanks everyone. Good morning. It's 6:30 in the morning for me, so I'm still in my pajamas. I'm originally from suburban California, so I grew up very much in the suburban experiment. Went to, did my high school years there, and I moved to New Zealand maybe a decade or so ago for some study, and have basically stayed ever since. I started a local conversation just a few months ago, and as far as I know, we're the second local conversation outside of North America. Um, and yeah, and so Chuck, I just want to say thanks for coming down to Wellington, whatever a few months ago it was.
Do you
I
know
think
I'm
that,
do you know I'm coming back next year?
yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for the
Yeah, I'm
NZPI
excited.
conference, which is great. I think that sort of you coming here really sparked a conversation. I think that someone, whoever at the infrastructure commission or whatever must have been like, oh, seeing a lot of strong town stuff, seeing what's happening in North America, and realizing that, we're a small country down here, but we're actually just repeating the same exact thing. Which is, obviously a bit of a problem. New Zealand, there's a joke that we're kind of always 10 or 15 years behind everywhere else, and it's very true in that respect. And so I find that many parts of New Zealand are reproducing the suburban experiment, but then they don't see, because they're still in the sort of sugar rush phase. They're like, no, this is great, and
Yep.
there's sort of a lacking of that alternative story. Um, I think that local conversations in New Zealand and probably Australia as well can have like a really big impact, because there needs to be that sort of alternative story. And I guess so. My question is, first is sort of, what are your thoughts on expanding local conversations, not just in New Zealand but other parts of the world? And then also, we would love for you to come down to Dunedin after the NZPI conference in March. So yeah.
Well, let me talk local conversations strategy for a minute. Um, in fact, while I'm doing that, let me bring up slides that I shared with the team the other day. Because the local conversations program is one that we did not create. It was created for us, and we've been trying to play kind of catch up in a way. So way back, and I didn't know how far back it went until I looked at this, but we started tracking in 2018 how many local groups there were calling themselves strong towns. And at that point we had 60 of them. They were mostly like Facebook groups. They were mostly, one or two people who were just interested in strong towns, but some of them were real legit, like we're getting together and meeting, and then they were doing cool things. And so we actually had someone on our team. I said, well, figure this out, like try to figure out what's going on. And we did, it was moving along. We were doing okay. And then if you remember Jacob from Denton, Texas, got like his dream job locally, and he left and stepped out. And John Pattison said, I would like to do that role. That was a little after 2020, I think. And we really got serious about, okay, what are these groups, and how do they form? How do they become effective? We tried to study the ones that were the most effective, and here's what we've done since then. So that's the growth in local conversations. We're at 304 right now, and I tried to tell my board last week, none of these are the Facebook group type. They're all like real legit people who are doing stuff. What we have tried to do is make it easier for those groups to be effective by putting the wind at their back. How do we, and I'm going to be in Sacramento this week, how do we, leverage our resources to help them communicate, help give them credibility, help answer questions in the gaps, help keep them focused on, what the most productive things are. I had a conversation with our Detroit team yesterday, and they wanted to go storm their state capitol and lobby for all these things. And I'm like, I think you maybe have like other things that would be more productive for you than being like a bit player in this broader coalition. But nonetheless, um, we've been trying to help these groups, in a sense, magnify what they're capable of doing by being that kind of stable support role for them. With John Pattison now stepping out and taking another position, and we had a really beautiful send off here last week for John, and I know a lot of you have chatted with John over the years. Um, this is why I've been talking about you, Elisa Lee. We've been having a lot of conversations about how do we best support these groups and how do we get them in a position where they can be as effective as some of our rock star groups like Sacktown, like PDX. How do we get them to a point where they can be really effective and we can be difference makers for them? With that being said, we've never put any. I'm going to say this, Norm. I want you to like give some correction or bumpers on this, but we've never put any effort into marketing this. We've talked about having like local conversations week as a way to create more local conversations. We've never really done that. We've never had a huge effort to create these. We've always said when we felt comfortable that we could onboard people, we could, support these in the way that we would pour a lot of energy into it. The energy's just happened more so than we've created it. And so I feel like the group that you're part of in New Zealand, I feel like the group in Uganda that has formed, we have some other ones in the Philippines and Taiwan and England and France and different parts of Europe that have, are in like the early preliminary, not ready to be put on the map stage, but have contacted us. We've taken that as affirmation of two things. First, there's a lot of power in these ideas and about talking about these things. And second, there's a lot of demand for more local capacity to do good. And some of that is in response to the crazy politics that we see at the macro level and the idea that people don't have control over their lives and their places and the direction we're going. And this is like an antidote to that. But a lot of it is filling the void that we see all over the world in doing the little things, doing the meaningful things block by block by block in a neighborhood. So I'm not at all surprised by it anymore. I mean, I've been able to go to New Zealand. I've been able to go to other parts of the world. I spoke at a UN conference last year in Geneva and got invited to Mongolia and Ghana and like places that I wasn't sure I could pronounce, let alone point to on a map. And every time we sat down and had a conversation with people, they said, what you're talking about is exactly what we're going through. And so I would be surprised if 5 years from now, we didn't have over 1,000 local conversations, with a lot of them being in other parts of the world. I think the last challenge I want to raise is, we want to, like, if I'm coming to New Zealand, I know I'm going to be on the North Island to begin with. It's a high priority for us to get to the South Island and meet with people. With having 300 of these, we've gotten to the point where like it's hard for me to drop in on a map somewhere and not be near a local conversation. What we've tried to do is create kind of a structure where and I'm going to say this using our inside words, insider language, which is maybe not Norm might say. I would say it differently, Chuck, and I'm like, welcome you to do this. But we want to build the competency and capacity of these groups so that when we are in town and are there, we can make really, really good use of our time too. I've met with a lot of groups where, it wasn't quite ready for prime time. And I've met with some groups where like I could sit down for 2 hours with them and I could say, hey, we've got these 5 resources we can get to you. We know these 3 people we can connect you with. And it just is like a massive difference maker. We want to get everybody to the point where they are a really high functioning local conversation where if I'm anywhere near, it's like the people who run my calendar, and it's not me always, uh, will look at that and say, that's a place where we have to get Chuck to. That's a place where we need to get Edward to, Norm to, get other people on the team to, because there's such a high functioning local conversation. So let's try to make that happen. And you guys, Norm and Daniel, you said the name of it. I looked at it and my Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings, Dunedain name came in, but you said Dunedin?
Uh, Dunedin.
It's Dunedin. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's also a Dunedin, Florida. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've heard.
We're going to try to jam in 2 more questions here. First one was dropped in the chat by Aaron regarding a $320 million bond issue for next year. So this is essential water, sewer, and road upgrades. But as with many bond packages, there's also the slip-ins and the add-ons and the wouldn't it be nice ifs. And so does Strong Towns have a framework for evaluating such bonds, and how can residents push back on taking on major debt for luxury projects?
When you say that, Norm, we're going to try to squeeze into, I take that as you want me to go faster. So let me try to go faster. I wrote a article a few years ago, and I included it in one of my books. I can't remember which one, about cash flow and mistaking cash flow, a cash flow problem for an insolvency problem. I think that would be a really good article to reference here, because a lot of times what I have seen with these debt issues is we have an insolvency problem. We actually don't have enough tax base to take care of things. And we confuse that for a cash flow problem. In other words, Joe Minicozy did this really well, where he had a chart. And he's like, here's when you built your roads, and then here's when they come due. And the thing is if you build the roads all at once, you got a big maintenance bill that is like an echo of that 2.5, 3 decades later. That can feel like a cash flow problem, because we had years where we didn't have a thing because we were just maintaining stuff. And then all of a sudden everything falls apart and everything needs to be done at once. Wow, we've got a big cash flow problem. But if your tax base is not creating enough wealth, if you're not actually like collecting enough to pay for it, you will take on a bunch of debt. And then before you've actually paid off that debt, the echo repeats itself and you have another big calamity that you have to deal with. I think your question is there a framework? And I don't think there is an easy framework to do this. The Lafayette work that we did, and Joe's team has done this now, and I want to say like 2 dozen or 3 dozen different cities, kind of shows the overall insolvency problem. But in general, to me, if you're borrowing money, you have a really high bar to show that you don't have an insolvency problem, that it truly is a cash flow problem. And that can only be done by figuring out how many roads you've got, how much it's going to cost to fix them, what state they're in. I mean, doing like a legit road study and then saying, here's how this cash flows over multiple life cycles in comparison to our tax base. Your staff at City Hall has the capacity to do that. Whether they are asked to do that before they come up with the spending package, I rarely see it happen. What I see happen is we have a problem, we can finance it with debt. A plus B equals C. Let's go do it. And oh, by the way, as long as we're going through the bonding process, we might as well add on the aquatic center and the other things that we've always wanted to do, because wouldn't that be cool? And, people will be really happy. The way you lay this out makes me super skeptical.
Yeah. If anybody's ever gone to a social situation where someone says, "Oh, I'll pick up the tab," half of us are inclined to just be very thoughtful or very careful, like, "Oh, like we're asking somebody else to pick up the tab for this." And in which case, with a bond, especially if it's a long term, that's the next generation. So I am committing my child to pay for things that I'm going to enjoy today. And that's that rec center that otherwise we would have waited longer until we had the reserves for it. And so it's in that same spirit. If there's someone picking up the tab, it is not Uncle Sam in the American context. It's it's your wallet, just coming from a different side of that wallet, and that is that difficulty. And then the other trouble that we see in Lansing, for example, we had a Strong Tents member. He said, yeah, because they had mold in the showers of one of the fire halls, they said, what if we did a public safety bond issue? And it just ballooned. And all of a sudden, they were consolidating a courthouse because there was somebody that wanted a better courthouse. Then all of a sudden, they were doing everything in a precinct. And they actually found that their fire responses, because they consolidated their services to the one mega center, it took them longer to reach the neighborhoods that previously they had decommissioned all these fire halls in. If they had just fixed the showers, they wouldn't have. It's one of those things like where you're like, how did that get out of hand? And then meanwhile, we've got our earlier Katie saying, I just want a playground to be rebuilt. And it's like, no, there's nothing for that. And so these twisting winds of favor is really part of the challenge there. Chuck, well done on timeliness on such a massive topic. And we have resources on the Strongtown site, linked to a few related to this. But Danielle had put up her hand to ask a question as well. So Danielle, the stage is yours.
I can't unmute. Oh,
You're
hi.
good now.
There you are. You're good.
Thanks. Didn't think you'd get to me. I appreciate it. We have had. I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that my mobility team has been doing here. We have kind of discovered, I think, that we've pinpointed some of the problems where they're coming from. Not surprisingly, the DPW in the city. And, we're kind of trying to figure out our way in to change some things, if we can, about how the committees are working, so that public input actually is coming at a time that's not always too late for road design. And so we're kind of doing some of this work. One of the things that we've seen is that we have this complete streets policy, which is actually pretty good. It reads well, right? The problem is that it's asking for something really specific. And every time, which is many times in an old city like ours, every time they can't actually meet the standard of 2 5-foot ADA accessible sidewalks on both sides and the bike lanes and the travel lanes and all the things, they just basically use the local transportation committee to get a waiver from the standard. And then after that, who knows what happens to it? There isn't an alternative standard or something else that then gets followed. It just kind of, then DPW does whatever it wants, So we're trying to kind of figure out how we can make a proposal to sort of fix what sounds like a very good and progressive complete street standard in a very good and progressive city, but on the whole, isn't really getting us to the place that we're like the little Amsterdam that lots of people around here want to be. It's not getting incremental additions. I'm not saying that the city is doing nothing, but it's not getting as many incremental additions of bike lanes or narrowing of roads in all the locations that they could be. So they go in and they do all this mill and overlay, which is just repaving, and no changes are made all the time. They're not taking the opportunities that we have when we're repaving to make small improvements to each street. So where should I look for some inspiration here?
So I can't remember who it was now that I interviewed for the podcast. It was a consultant, and they had written a new framework for implementing complete streets. It was at some point last year, I want to say, Norm. And the thing that was unique and novel about that is that they stated up front that they were going to compromise traffic speed and traffic flow, as opposed to what an engineer would say would be pedestrian and bike safety. What you are describing is a scenario where we're doing a project, we've got a complete streets policy. Implementing that complete streets policy would compromise vehicle speed and vehicle volume. And so what we do is we go and get a waiver because we are prioritizing that over the other things. I think if you want the complete streets policy to actually function, you would need to say that the standard 5 foot this and that, those are like guidelines. Those are things that you're trying to reach. But the thing you're trying to do is on your streets, you are trying to prioritize the movement of people walking and people biking. And only when that has been prioritized and is clear and you've done that, then you say, how do we accommodate automobile traffic to the amount that we can?
A
I
lot of
feel
the time,
like
just to clarify, a lot of the time they're like, there's not enough space because it's an old New England city. So sometimes that's what they're saying.
right. There's not enough space to do 5-foot sidewalks and 6-foot bike lanes and have, 12 to 14-foot auto lanes. But what you would find on all of these is if the policy was written differently, the first thing we're going to do is say, how do we accommodate people walking and people biking? And I was going to say, I would designate roads and streets in my city. I mean, that's one of the things that we always recommend is instead of having a hierarchical road network, say, here are neighborhood streets where we've got people walking, people biking, and then here are the places where we're trying to move traffic quickly. So you don't fight with them on the places where you're moving traffic quickly. Be like, go use your engineering standards, go to town. Like, that's great. But in these areas here, we've said this is where we're going to have homes and businesses and people crossing the street and people biking and people walking. What a design then would look like is you would start and you would say, how many people are biking and walking here? What do those facilities need to look like? And I'm even going to go so far as to say there's so many people biking and walking here that we can't accommodate any vehicles through here. If you were in Times Square or Broadway in New York City, you would look at that and say, and they have in a lot of instances, there are so many people biking and walking here that we just can't we can't let cars go through here. Like it just not, they're going to have to go somewhere else. I don't think you'll probably be there. This is in Northampton, right? I don't think you'll be there in most instances, but you will have streets where, boy, the traffic can only go one direction and the street's going to be really narrow. Or, we're going to have a yield street of some type, or, we're not going to have 12-foot lanes. We're going to have 10-foot lanes or 9-foot lanes. Those are all compromises that DPWs often don't want to do because they will say like that's the thing that can't, and then the other things that compromise. What a good complete streets plan would do is turn that around and say, okay, maybe we don't need, maybe what we're going to have to do here is have a shared sidewalk or a bike lane on one side instead of both sides, or maybe we're going to have, whatever. Like those would be compromises, but you start with we have to have people walking and biking safely here. It has to be separated from traffic. It has to bam, 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 bam. And then we will say, when that is all done, what can we achieve from a automobile traffic standpoint? And that's a policy up front, not like standards that you would write about certain widths and all that. Does that make sense, Danielle?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Okay.
I'll have to like look in and to the ordinance itself, the policy, and kind of see if we can suggest some tweaks to that language.
I think a lot of times engineers they like to put forward here's our street standard. Here's our standard street. And, you start with the traffic lane widths and then you go from there. And this is what they'll say is critical. And then everything else is like an add-on. What you would do is start the opposite way and say on a street, moving people, walking and biking is the critical. And then everything else is the add-on.
Thanks.
Yeah, do it. If you can get that done, let me know because I'd love to celebrate that.
All right.
Okay, we are at the top of the hour, and I do want to respect the time that most of you have allotted for this. So I do believe we're going to wrap up. A quick reminder: tomorrow we're doing block parties, not all together. Wouldn't that be awesome? But instead,
Would be
it's
cool.
going to be a session about block parties in our locomotive session. So you do have access. If you haven't gotten that yet, check your email. That'll have been emailed to you. We also are. Yeah, what else do we got going on? We got Member Week coming up in November, so look forward to some of the programming around that. I believe I can share this now. We're going to do regional meetups on Zoom. We did a Canadian one because the Canadians really needed it. And it was really cool. We had a great time. So look forward to that. And that'll be coming up in mid-November as well. And yeah, if there are other ways that we can be in support of what you're doing in your communities, please do share that with us. Continue to keep the lines of communication wide open. Deeply appreciate Chuck, you making time to be here today. Edward, thanks again. And to each one of you, keep doing what you can to build strong towns. Thanks for taking on this task even today. I hope we got to many of the questions. There's still a few. We'll take them up next week if we can and carry on the conversation. Chuck, last word to you.
I shared a house in the chat and promise it's literally a block and a half from mine. I promise anybody who wants to buy there and move to Brainerd that I will. You can come over and sit on my porch and we'll chat about all these things endlessly. I'll bring you cookies at Christmas time, and I'll help you shovel your sidewalks even in the winter when it's really cold. So, yeah.
But winter is what, 10 months, right?
Yeah, we were strangely at 85 degrees this past weekend, and last night had freezing below 32, and now it should be cold until April, May. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Chuck will find a TIF to get you access with your
Yeah.
down payment, and then get you seated in. And I can attest that Christmas cookies are worth it. So just for that alone.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.